Good morning. I would just want to start by thanking the organizers, especially CDFA, Youth Davis, and Spark, and other colleagues that have really engaged with FAO. This is my second time to speak to this summit. I'm really super excited because on how the community is growing, but also the engagement and commitment to address methane emissions in the livestock sector, but also to look at other environmental challenges, economic and social challenges that are ahead of us, especially as we help our farming community really to address climate change. So for this talk, I will try to go much more broader and globally to look at the different pathways to meeting global climate goals. So let's see if it works. Not well connected, but yeah. Good. So my presentation will be in 4 parts. First, I will talk about the global trends in the livestock sector, so how the system are evolving and what to expect in the future. Second, I will deep dive mainly on the assessment of greenhouse gas emissions and why methane is important across different production systems. Discuss broadly the pathways towards lower emissions, and the presentation really presenting some of the FAO's work to reduce enteric methane. So as you know, globally, livestock sector is growing, and it is expected to grow up to 20% by 2050. And this growth will be mainly driven by developing countries, especially Africa and Asia, where the human population growth is expected to be very important. So then it's quite obvious that we need to produce more food to feed the people. So livestock is there to provide livelihoods, food security, and nutrition to different communities around the world. If you can see, there is one problem with the slide. There's a part of the slide that is not coming up. I don't know what's happening with the technicians. But yeah, it doesn't prevent us to continue, but I would have wished to get that part of the slide that is not coming up. So if you see the consumption, so this is really one of the most important parts. If you look at the consumption per capita, everywhere in the world, the consumption of animal product will increase. So this is quite an important element to understand because as we discuss dietary change and switching to plant-based products, we see that actually the countries that are where the population is growing, they are not receiving enough proteins. They are not consuming enough. So they will need to increase the amount of proteins if we want to reduce also the issue of malnutrition, human health issues related to human health, and so on. So except in developed countries, we see that some commodities will be stable, but we don't expect a huge decline in terms of consumption. So this is kind of a reality that is facing us, and I believe that what we are doing here is to find a solution on how to feed the people, to provide high quality proteins to the people with low environmental and socio-economic cost. So in FAO, we look at the emissions, really looking at the entire life cycle from the production of inputs to the processing and retailing. Usually, we don't assess much the consumption, especially that we don't have strong data sets to help us understand how the animal products are mixed with other ingredients. So for this assessment here, we limit ourselves really to the packaging side of animal products. So most of the data that FAO produce on emissions, they are now publicly available in dashboards that you can access directly on FAO websites. This dashboard provides information on so far on a regional basis, not yet on the country, as we are seeking more validation on country level. But the future would be to provide this information at country level so that all stakeholders can really access the information about emissions, animal production, but also the solutions that can be applicable to different regions around the world. So let's look at the current status of emissions. Globally, livestock contribute about 12% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the new FIGO that FAO published last year during COP28 in Dubai. And if you look at the source of those emissions, of course, ruminants are the most important, but also because the ruminant biomass is the most important. But if you look at where the FIGO here, I don't have a pointer in this device, but I want to say that in red is methane. So methane represents 54% of the global emissions. And enteric methane, within that category, enteric methane is 85%. So meaning that solutions that are directed to anaerobic digestion, for instance, they address only 50% of the emission. So we do still have a long way to go if we want to deal with the big elephant in the room, which is the enteric methane. So more in the details. I know. Something's happening. Okay. So if you look at the details, we can see that, of course, in red, everything in red here is methane. Is much more dominant here, and we see that mainly emissions are taking place on farms. So meaning that farmers are really on five fronts of this strategy on reducing emissions. So if we cannot engage producers from different scales, so small scale, large scale, they need really all to be engaged to make sure that we can reduce those emissions. We have also emissions that are associated with upstream and downstream processes. Usually those emissions, if you look at the International Expert Panel on Climate Change, the way they are reported not in livestock, but in other sectors. But of course, when we take the life cycle approach to make sure that we understand the implication of livestock activities, especially across different sectors, in particular the energy and land use. So where the emissions are taking place, interestingly, we see that most of the emissions, 81%, is really associated with the livestock production in low and middle income countries. So only 18% of emissions, especially when you look at methane, they are associated with high income countries. So there is really a long way to go in terms of addressing emission in low-income countries. That's why FAO focuses much more in low and middle-income countries to address methane. So then, when we look at the performance, what we call emission intensity, which is mainly relating the emission to the productivity, we see that mainly ruminant products have high emission intensity, but when you see what is driving that emission intensity is methane. So all the red color you see on those bars are methane. So meaning that addressing methane makes sense if we want livestock to be part of the climate solution, especially on the mitigation side. So that's why this summit is much more important, but also the work happening around the world by different partners. It's also important to make sure that we address productivity, but also we reduce emissions, especially of methane. So in terms of pathways, we are expecting that looking at the increase of livestock population by 20% by 2050, the emission, on the other hand, will increase by around 46%. moving from 6 gigaton to about 9 gigaton. So therefore, we need to see what to do here. So FAO proposed in the recent publication the different pathways, so on how to solve that. So some solutions that we see here, especially if we look at consumer-based solutions, the interchange and the reduction of food loss and waste are important, but of course at global level they will reduce between 4 and 5%. And there are many reasons. I think we have received some comments about this, but there are many reasons about this. It's that most of the population, we have more than 800 million people that are hungry, that are going to the bed hungry. So if we want to reduce the prevalence of malnutrition to those people will need more animal proteins. So that's why when you do the dietary strategy, you need to take an account about the diversity of, and also the problem of food insecurity that we have around the world. So therefore, it should not be mainly based on assumptions, but we need to connect with the reality, which actually is based on the estimate that FAO did here. So the second solution are really based on what farmers can do in terms of on-farm measures that can provide between 5 to 20% reduction. Some may say, yeah, we can reduce more, especially if you do with feed additive and so on. But here we try to be a bit conservative in a sense that the adoption rate, so the buy-in of farmers to adopt those technologies won't happen over the next day. So it will take time, the buy-in. So that's why we try to be on really a bit minimalistic in terms of adoption, because we understand the issue related to regulation, related to feed safety and food safety, and so on. So that's why we see that those solutions are quite important. They can provide this up to 20% reduction, but which is very good enough, because if you look at the global methane pledge, is mainly targeting 30%. So meaning that this is not, it's a huge progress in terms of reduction that can be done on farm. So it's important to have farmers and also all the actors that are in the supply chain to be fully involved. But as I will say later, and also Undersecretary mentioned early in the morning, so we need incentive to make sure that this adoption can be even higher than what we project here. There are other solutions that are quite also important, but mainly addressing other more CO2 gases than no CO2 gases, especially carbon sequestration, circular bioeconomy. It's also recycling, the use of different biomass that are produced within the system, but also manure management. So then, this is very positive in terms of, sorry, I just realized that I did not move the slide on this side, so I'm sorry. So this is very positive that in terms of finding solutions, we understand that all those solutions won't be additive, as you see here. There are many trade-offs and synergies across those solutions. So what FAO will do next is really try to do the same, but taking a regional perspective so that we can minimize the noise and bias that could be in different assumptions. So that's something that we are working on now to make sure that we can provide a pathway that is very specific to different production systems, but also to different regions around the world, and also to different countries, because we have already some countries interested in having national pathways on emission reduction. So this is very interesting because I put IPCC figure here. Just tell you that the assumptions that we used are quite in line with the findings of Assessment Report 6, especially when you look at this figure here, where different mitigation options that can provide a co-benefit can be really absorbed within a financing that is not highly costly. So livestock solutions are also part of this, and especially the reduction of methane and NTO. But if you look at the dietary change, it's interesting to see that even IPCC here cannot cost this because there is no data. So if it's one of the solutions, especially IPCC define a healthy diet considering a large amount of animal protein. So meaning that in the future we may consider especially strong assumption on this, but even looking at what IPCC found here, it's very, very well in line with FAO findings. So then, where are we with policies? So it's important to note that the current commitments in terms of national commitment on the climate goals are still out of the track in terms of reducing the global average temperature increase to below 1.5 degree or to 2 degrees. So meaning that we need to raise ambitions of the commitments by integrating both mitigation, of course, and adaptation into national determined contributions. And we have opportunity because 2025 will be the next cycle for updating NDCs. And we are supporting countries to make sure that enteric methane is one of the agenda. And at FAO, we got a mandate from our members, especially our governments, to do so. So we are helping countries to build their capacities so that they can integrate methane in the next cycle of the NDC. So the other element to look at here is that when you think about net zero, in terms of methane reduction, there is no a projection of net zero to methane reduction. So what is really seen here is a slight reduction in emissions because this would be able to provide the cooling effect that is needed. While for CO2-based sectors, the reduction should be really dramatic, which we don't see now. But if we want to reach net zero, it's important, especially to deal with energy sector, to reduce emissions substantially to reach the net zero, and also build the sink. So carbon removal or soil carbon sequestration are quite important here. So the other element to look is the finance. So we need finance, investments so far in methane mitigation are only 5%. In livestock, globally, climate finance is 5%. So it's really too small to make a change. So we need international cooperation. I think this is one of the reasons we are here. We need also technology transfer. That means all technologies, either sensors for measurements, feed additives, and so on. So we need those technology transfer to make sure that they are widely adopted around the world. But to do so, we need good governance. We need policies that create incentive that are enough to convince and motivate farmers to change the practices and adopt best practices. So there is one thing that I think Undersecretary also mentioned this about MRV. So let me conclude this by talking about MRV. So here you can see the situation of the national inventories. Here, for instance, are the methods used by different countries to report their greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see that 67% of the countries are using tier 1 approach, which is the basic approach in terms of emission reporting. So this is a huge problem because you cannot do mitigation with tier 1 approach. So, and even those that are using tier 2, 19%, it's a mix. Usually it's one species, cattle. That is really analyzed with tier 2, or sometimes it's only dairy, not the entire head. So we have a lot to do in terms of building capacity at country level in terms of emission, building capacity also in terms of science, the training at university to make sure that those issues are well integrated in the curricula of students so that the next generation will be able to handle this. Because most of the countries are using consultancy company to develop this, and those companies are not the way anywhere to implement. So that's the difficulty. So we are trying to build this capacity, and from this year, the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change is requesting countries to report their first biennial transparency reports, and we will be able to see actually what is behind the big numbers. Because now everything will be transparent. So we will need to kind of easily understand the data gap that exists and how we can support to make sure that the inventory are improved. So quickly, I think I already mentioned this, just to say that FAO is well engaged with many countries to help them solve the issue of methane, but also climate commitment in general in different developing countries. And we are mainly doing so through the Sustainable Livestock Transformation Framework that has been launched last year. And we hope that we'll be able to reach many countries on this journey. But I can say that it should be a continuous support until we reach all the 194 countries that are committing to reduce emissions so far. So this is how the Sustainable Livestock Transformation Initiative is built. Sorry, I need to. So mainly looking at how we change the narrative. As you know, there is always an issue of communication, how we communicate livestock sustainability. So it's important that we support and we build a proper narrative with evidence. We promote good practices, that's very important. Policies, especially policies that are attractive for investment. So we need private sector. So in the speed, we need private sector investment. It's not possible to solve this with public investment. It's important to address, of course, animal health. And you know, with the connection on One Health and also the pandemic, but also build partnership, making sure that no one is left behind. As to conclude this, I want to just say that it's important to conduct assessment to understand the big picture, but developing pathways that are very realistic, implementable at country level is very important, and country are, and also farmers and other stakeholders are really in need of that to get guidance from research, from science, from also policymakers. I want to say that we need investment. Investment not only in projects that we conduct, but also investment that goes to the farmer. We want farmers to be supported, to get the direct incentives so that they can adopt the right best practices that are climate smart to reduce emissions, but also increase productivity as well as their income and their livelihood. So I want just to put on the screen those two reports that some of you here have contributed to. That kind of guiding the action at country level, especially in terms of methane mitigation, but also understanding the pathways that we can adopt across different production systems to solve the problem. So on that, I want to thank you again, and let's take